Hey, so thanks for joining me for the last chapter of Spring According to Humphrey. We are on chapter 14, On with the Show. Always happy to get back to room 26. But that Monday, I was even more excited than usual. I wanted to tell Og about the circus, decorations, and the rainbow. I hoped maybe he'd seen it too. But as soon as Simon put my cage on the table, Og began to leap up and down. Boing, 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 he said. He leaped so high I thought he was going to pop the top of his tank. Goodness, Mrs. Brisbane said. What is going on with Og? Simon was still standing near us and he gasped loudly. Mrs. Brisbane, come here quick. He was staring at the tadpoles. Mrs. Brisbane gasped too when she joined him. Oh my, she said. Boing, Og twanged. Their heads are so much bigger, our teacher said. And look, Simon pointed, their bodies are much longer. Their tails too. Boing, 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 Og repeated. All right, Uncle Og, Simon said. We see what happened. Other students came into the classroom and gathered around. Flip and Flap look more like frogs, Rosie said. Right on schedule, just Joey said. According to the booklet, it won't be long now before they're real frogs. I wished my friends weren't all crowded around the tank because I couldn't get a good look at the tadpoles. Amazing, tell the truth, Thomas said. Boing, I agreed. Oh, Og agreed. Mrs. Brisbane turned to her students. Speaking of amazing things, did any of you see the rainbow on Saturday? Yes, I squeaked. Boing, I guess Og had seen it too. And so had almost all of my friends. Mrs. Brisbane had planned to start the day with math, but instead she sent the class to the library to look up facts about rainbows and tadpoles. It takes a really great teacher to change her plans when her students get excited about something. When they returned, they shared what they had learned. According to Helpful Holly, rainbows are caused by light bouncing off water droplets. That's where the rain part comes in. And Small Paul explained that the colors of the rainbow are in this order: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. I wished I'd paid more attention. That's Roy G. Biv, Nicole shouted. Paul nodded and said, the letters of his name stand for the colors of the rainbow. I think every time I see a rainbow from now on, I'll think of Roy G. Biv. Joey talked more about tadpole development. Some tadpoles take even longer to grow into frogs than Flip and Flap. Our principal, Mr. Morales, visited our classroom to see the tadpoles. He was wearing a tie with small, colorful rainbows on it. I wish my children could see the tadpoles, he said. What about seeing us? I squeaked. Boing, Og agreed. That reminds me of something, Mrs. Brisbane said. The students would like to have Humphrey and Og at their booth on Thursday, as long as it's all right with you. Of course, he said. I'll bring Willie and Brenda along to see them. It was one of the busiest weeks I've ever known in room 26. One day, Mrs. Brisbane showed the class the list of jobs for Family Fun Night. There would be ringmasters and ringmistresses, ticket takers, prize givers, and students to help people through the maze and run the leapfrog competition. Then she went down the list and drew students' names out of a big top hat. The hat was the same one that the ringmasters and mistresses would wear. Felipe, Kelsey, and Nicole were excited to run the leapfrog game. Rosie, Daniel, Holly, and Tall Paul would help at the hamster maze. Joey, Rosie, Sophia, Thomas, and Cassie were going to be ringmistresses, and masters. Their job was to attract people into the Animal Acts area. The rest of the students were ticket takers and prize presenters. All of my classmates looked happy with their assignments except for one. Cassie just stared at the floor and looked a little bit sick. When my friends left for recess, she stopped to ask Mrs. Brisbane if she could switch jobs and be a ticket taker. Why? Mrs. Brisbane asked. Cassie held her stomach. I don't like to talk in front of people, especially people I don't know. Mrs. Brisbane nodded. This isn't like giving a speech. You just stand there and say, step right up to the greatest animal show on earth. You can do that. Cassie didn't look up. I'm not sure. You won't know until you try it, Mrs. Brisbane said. Remember the ideas we've shared about breathing and positive thoughts? Cassie nodded. This would be a wonderful way to practice those ideas, Mrs. Brisbane said. Let's try it now. Take some good deep breaths and tell yourself that you will do a great job. I was unsqueakably happy to see Cassie use her deep breathing. And now, say, welcome to Mrs. Brisbane's amazing animal acts. Step right up and try the Humpster's Jungle Maze. Come try Og's Frog Leap Challenge. I love Mrs. Brisbane's dramatic voice. Cassie said, that was great. Mrs. Brisbane asked her to try it. Cassie took a good, long breath. Welcome to Amazing Brisbane's Acts. Step right up for the Humpster's Maze and Og's Frog Leap. Mrs. Brisbane smiled. That was very good, Cassie. She said, I know you can do it with a little practice. Give it all you've got. I hopped on my wheel and started to spin. You can do it, Cassie, I squeaked. Cassie laughed. Look at Humphrey. Mrs. Brisbane laughed. Can you try as hard as Humphrey does? Cassie nodded. I think so. That's all I ask of you, Mrs. Brisbane said. I squeaked in agreement. By Thursday, Flip and Flap had changed again. They looked like tiny frogs with very long tails. Why are the tails so long? Holly asked. Og just has a little stubby tail. Boing. I don't think Og liked having his tail called a stub. Joey explained that the tadpoles' bodies would grow much bigger. When they're fully grown, they'll have stubby tails like their Uncle Og, he said. Og dived into the water side of his tank and began to splash loudly. Just then, Mrs. Wright came into room 26. Excuse me for interrupting. I'm checking to see if you're all set for tonight. Everything's under control, Mrs. Brisbane replied. I saw your signs about the hamster race and frog leap. I want to make sure you're talking about actual hamsters and frogs, Mrs. Wright continued. They're not allowed in the gym. My friends moaned and groaned. Mrs. Wright is very particular about her gym. I don't think she'd allow humans in the gym if she had her way. Is there a rule about that? Miss Brisbane asked. Absolutely, Mrs. Wright said. That's funny, Mrs. Brisbane said. Mr. Morales told me it was fine. Mrs. Wright shook her head. Joey raised his hand. Humphrey's been in the gym before. He was there after school and in the holiday program, too. Mrs. Wright scowled. It would mean a lot if you could bend the rules, Mrs. Brisbane said. They really want to show off Humphrey and Og. Mrs. Wright was still scowling. She glanced over at our table. What's in the aquarium? She asked. Tadpoles, Mrs. Brisbane told her. Mrs. Wright shook her head. Strictly forbidden, she said, but the frog and the hamster can come if they are contained. My friends cheered loudly. Thanks, 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 I squeaked, though no one could hear me over the cheering. Boing, 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 Og shouted. 3 cheers for Mrs. Wright, Rosie yelled. She and my classmates cried out, hip, hip, hooray, hip, hip, hooray, hip, hip, hooray for Mrs. Wright. I think Mrs. Wright even smiled before she left room 26. Once school was over and the building seemed empty, I dashed over to visit Gigi. Og and I get to come to family fun night, I told her. At first, Mrs. Wright said Ms. Mack couldn't bring me, Gigi squeaked. But then she came back and said the principal said I could come too. Hip, hip, hooray for Mr. Morales and for Mrs. Wright, I cheered. Oh, and my friends tried putting a clown hat on me, but I kept shaking it off until they gave up, Gigi said. Was that bad? No, I assured her. Just because you're a pet doesn't mean you have to do things you're not comfortable with. Thanks, Gigi said with a big yawn. I hope I can stay awake tonight. It was getting dark, so I scurried back to room 26. I was so unsqueakably excited. I took a long spin on my wheel to calm down. I hoped Cassie was doing some exercise, too. A little while later, the door opened and Bob turned on the lights. I liked Bob, but I was a little disappointed. I hadn't seen Aldo for such a long time. Good news, he said as he started to sweep. You two will be seeing a lot more of me. I just got hired to be the permanent nighttime custodian at Longfellow School starting next fall. Oh, I squeaked. Boing, boing, Og twanged. Yep, Bob continued. Aldo's got a teaching job. He's happy and I'm happy too. I was happy about that Aldo's dream came true, but it broke my heart a little to think that my good friend was leaving. The rest of the evening was a great big happy blur. Mr. and Mrs. Brisbane took Og and me to the gym where my friends and their parents were setting up. The door to the gym was draped with red and white striped cloth to make it look like a circus tent. Mrs. Wright was already sitting at the ticket booth. The families could buy tickets there and use them for the games and food. We passed by Ms. Mack's booth. Gigi's cage was sitting on a table in front of the clown toss booth. Big, colorful clowns were painted on the backdrop. They had holes where the big mouths were. "Watch this, Humphrey," Miss Mack called out as she tossed a beanbag, and it went right into the clown's mouth. "Way to go," I cheered. "Humphrey, I don't think there's any way I'll fall asleep tonight," Gigi squeaked. As we passed by the yummy-smelling popcorn stand, I saw Gail's mom doing face painting and a man twisting balloons to look like animals. At least they looked like animals if you used your imagination. Then we came to a stop, and I looked up. Oh my, it was thrilling to see the tall entrance at Mrs. Brisbane's that said Brisbane's Amazing Animal Acts, especially since I was one of the amazing animals. Simon's mom hammered the last few nails into the jungle maze sign on one side of the entrance. Simon's dad touched up the paint on the leapfrog sign on the other side. "Perfect," Mrs. Brisbane said. "Absolutely perfect. And here are the stars of the show," Simon's mom said, waving at Og and me. My heart went thump, thump, thump. "It's showtime," Mrs. Brisbane told us. I peeked through the doorway and saw that the big, colorful boxes were arranged to make a maze. Rolling Rosie was rolling her way through it. Next to the maze, I saw a funny sight. Daniel's mom was down on all fours as her son leapfrogged across her back and over her head, landing in front of her. The gym quickly filled up with families and noise. In fact, it was so noisy my whiskers wiggled, my tail twitched, and my ears buzzed. Og's tank and my cage were set on a table by the entrance to the Animal Acts. "Seeing you two will help bring people in," Mrs. Brisbane said. Thomas arrived wearing a big smile and carrying a slice of pizza. "Cheese pizza," he said, "no mushrooms." Joey was the first ringmaster, and his voice was loud and clear. "Step right up to the most fantastic animal show on earth. Run the amazing Humpster Maze. Leap like a frog. Step right up." Sophie and her dad arrived, and he juggled near the entrance. People stopped to watch as he juggled 3 balls, and then 4. He could even throw them behind his back and keep them in the air forever. There was so much to see and hear that I didn't notice when Cassie arrived with her mom and dad. Her parents stopped to say hi to Og and me, but Cassie just stared at Joey as he loudly invited people to come inside the tent where Small Paul took tickets. Tall Paul arrived with his dad and his mom. When Mrs. Brisbane greeted them, Paul said, "I didn't think my mom could get off work, but when her supervisor heard about family fun night, he let her switch nights." I wish I could give his mom's supervisor a great big paw shake. AJ and his big family all came and tried the games. His sister Dee Lee had a huge smile on her face as she carried a gigantic pencil. "I won it, Humphrey," she told me. "You had to beat the clock to win a prize, and I was the fastest one." "Great, great, great," I squeaked. Soon, Mrs. Brisbane told Joey to hand over the top hat to Cassie. She looked scared at the crowds of people walked by, so I hopped on my wheel and started spinning. Cassie glanced in my direction. "Go," I squeaked. Cassie closed her eyes, took a very deep breath, held it, and let it go. And another one. Then she opened her eyes and in a loud, clear voice said, "Step right up. Ladies and gentlemen, see the most amazing animal show on earth. Can you beat the Humpster's Maze? Can you leap like a frog? Step right up to Brisbane's Amazing Animal Acts." Hip, hip, hooray! I hopped off my wheel and jumped for joy. "Boing, boing," Og said. Cassie took a few more breaths and started again. Each time she did it, she got better and better. By the end of her turn, she had a huge smile on her face. I think she wanted to keep going, but when her time was up, she handed her hat to Rosie. Mr. Morales showed up wearing a tie with happy clown faces on it. He brought his children, Brenda and Willie, to the table. They were a lot taller than the last time I'd seen them. Remember Humphrey? He asked them. And here is Og the Frog. They wanted to talk to us more than play games, but the biggest surprise of the evening was when I looked up and saw Aldo standing at our table smiling down at Og and me. I have missed you, my friends, but I took time off when the twins were born. You heard about them, right? Anna and Marco, the most beautiful babies on earth. Then I had finals, and then I got a teaching job. Congratulations, I squeaked, even though my heart was breaking a little bit. Boing, Og said. Mrs. Brisbane came up to say hello to Aldo. It's too early to bring the twins to such a noisy event, he said, but I wanted to come and thank you for that note you left. As soon as I heard Miss Loomis was moving away, I thought of you, Aldo, she said. I knew Longfellow School would be lucky to have you. I'm glad Mr. Morales agreed, Aldo said. I can't wait for school to start. He turned back to Og and me. And I'm going to come see you every day and bring you treats, he said. Yippee! I squeaked with joy. Did you hear that, Og? I asked my neighbor after Aldo had left. Aldo is coming to teach at Longfellow School, and we'll see him every day. Boing, 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 boing. Joey raced over. Og, why are you shouting? Do you miss Flip and Flap? I think he just wants to be heard, Mrs. Brisbane said. I made a decision about the tadpoles, Joey told her. I really want my own frog at home, so I think I'm going to keep Flap as my pet. I want to make a whole book of drawings of him. Then I'll leave Flip in room 26, if that's okay with you. The students will be thrilled, Mrs. Brisbane said with a smile. There's always room for another pet in room 26. Even though I was unsqueakably tired later that night, I sat and thought about everything that had happened this spring. I thought about the crocus poking its purple head up through the snow and other blooming things. I thought about how two little specks turned into frogs and how Og was an uncle. I thought about Aldo's new family and how he inspired us to go back, or how he was inspired to go back to school and be a great, great, great teacher like Mrs. Brisbane. His students would be lucky. I was lucky to know him, too. I thought about Bob, who needed a job and deserved one. Wasn't it wonderful that Aldo moved on? Bob got his chance for a new start to help his family. I thought of how Cassie's family wanted to help her calm down and how I helped them, too. I thought about the new family nesting on Cassie's tree and the many apples on my classmates' family trees. And I thought about the families building booths, playing leapfrog, running the hamster maze, and laughing together. Family fun night was truly fun. I thought about my dream about my mother. Even though I grew up fast, she said I was her golden boy. Her fur was soft and she smelled so nice. I took out my notebook and by the light of the street lamp outside my window, I started to draw a tree. On the tree, I drew little round apples. Then I wrote a name on each one. Mrs. Brisbane, Aldo, Just Joey, Rolling Rosie, Stop Giggling Gail, Tall Paul, Small Paul, Fix It Felipe, Miss Mac, Og the Frog, Gigi. I kept writing more and more names on all the humans I loved and who loved me back. Principal Morales, Speak Up Saya, Hurry Up Harry. It took me a very long time because I think my family is the biggest and best of all. And then I added two more names, Flip and Flap, because even in a big family like mine, there's always room for more. And